Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you are aware, the Toronto Police Service undertook a very significant major investigation last year. It culminated on June 13th of this year with the arrest of several dozen suspects, the laying of over 200 charges, and the execution of numerous search warrants. At the conclusion of that investigation, a great deal of evidence was seized and information and charges were placed before the courts. There were indications through the course of that investigation of other criminal activity not encompassed within the original Traveller investigative mandate, and as a consequence, I directed that an investigation be conducted into information that we had received with respect to certain criminal behaviors to ensure that we left no stone unturned, that we did our job, that we conducted investigations into allegations and evidence of criminality. That investigation resulted in the arrest on October 1st of one individual or two individuals with respect to a number of drug-related charges. As a result of the evidence that was seized on June 13th at the conclusion of Project Traveller, a number of electronic devices, computers, telephones, and hard drives were seized, and all of the devices that have been seized have been subject to forensic review and examination by members of the Toronto Police Service Intelligence Unit Computer Technology Section. On October the 29th, on Tuesday of this week, we received information from our Computer Technology Section that in the examination of a hard drive that had been seized on June 13th, they were able to identify a number of files that had been deleted and that they were able to recover those files. As a result, I have been advised that we are now in possession of a recovered digital video file relevant to the investigations that have been conducted. That file contains video images which appear to be those images which were previously reported in the press with respect to events that took place, we believe, at a house on Windsor Road in Etobicoke. That information has been turned over to our investigators who are here today. The investigators have taken that information and that video evidence into consideration, and as a result of their investigations and evidence that they have gathered, they have this morning taken into custody a Mr. Sandro Lisi and laid a charge of extortion with respect to the evidence that has been collected. Mr. Lisi will be appearing, I believe, later today in court in answer to that charge, and all of the evidence that has been seized with respect to that investigation and that charge will be presented before the courts, and I will not be releasing it today. But I do want to advise you that we have continued with that investigation. The Toronto Police Service is now in possession of a digital video file, and that evidence will now be presented in court in support of the extortion charge that has been laid. I'll be happy to take your questions now.
That video shows the mayor in it. You referenced those images that were in the press. Is Mayor Ford in that video?
Again, I'm not going to get into the evidence of this case, but I can tell you that the digital video file that we have recovered depicts images which are consistent with those that had previously been reported in the press.
The mayor of Toronto is under. The mayor of Toronto is met with the mayor.
I do not believe so. I believe that we have interviewed quite a number of people over the course of that investigation, but that interview has not yet taken place.
Can you now confirm what the court documents released today indicate, which is Toronto Police Service has been surveilling and investigating the mayor of Toronto?
Let me confirm for you that the Toronto Police Service has been undertaking a very extensive investigation into allegations of criminality. That's what we've been doing. We've been conducting a criminal investigation, and in the course of that criminal investigation, we have been doing everything necessary to gather the evidence and to gather evidence in support of that investigation.
But the mayor of Toronto,
Just hang on a second, Sean. I'm going to take another question, Austin.
The mayor appears to be making transactions with Lisi. At one point, did your officers not want to pull him over and see what he was buying or what was in that transaction?
Again, the officers are very experienced and competent investigators, and they were gathering evidence the proper course of action for us is to gather all of that evidence. If the evidence supports reasonable and probable grounds for the laying of a criminal charge, then to lay that charge and to bring that evidence before the courts. Now, it raises an important point. Our responsibility in the gathering of that evidence is to place it before the courts, and that's what we have done in the case of the traveler charges, in the case of the earlier charges with respect to the drug offenses that were alleged on October the 1st, and with the charges that were laid today. That evidence goes before the courts. I am not going to divulge the entire nature of that. The evidence goes before the courts, and it is up to the courts to make a determination as to the admissibility of that evidence and to whether or not it will be revealed to the public. We've done our job here, Austin. We've done an investigation where we have found an evidence of criminal behavior. We have pursued that to its logical outcome, and we have gathered the evidence. Reasonable grounds have been formed by the investigators. They've laid that charge. The evidence is now being placed before the courts, and the courts is the proper venue for the determination on how that evidence should then be treated with respect to its admissibility and its public disclosure.
Why not say if the mayor is in those images or not? Well, why not reveal that information? You're saying it's consistent with what was reported in the media. Maybe not expand on that?
I think it's fair to say that the mayor does appear in that video, but I'm not going to get into the detail of what activity is depicted on that video.
The mayor does?
I'm sorry, yes, ma'am.
The mayor does appear in that video?
Yes.
Was the victim of extortion the mayor?
What's that?
Was the mayor?
And again, you're taking me into the evidence, and I'm not going to go there. That evidence will be placed before the courts, and all of the evidence we collected, including the digital video evidence that has been recovered from a hard drive seized during the traveler investigation, which forms part of that evidence, will be presented in court, and the court will determine what, if any, of that evidence should be disclosed.
Chief Blair, just to clarify, you said that this is consistent with that video. What was reported was that the video appeared to show Mayor Ford smoking crack cocaine. Is that what you're saying is consistent with what you have recovered now?
We have recovered a digital video file, which is consistent with that which had previously been described in various media reports. And that file forms part of the evidence of the charge that we have laid today. That file will form part of the evidence that we present to court, and the court will determine what, if any, of that evidence will be made public.
One video file, Chief Blair?
Yes, there were actually several video files, but relevant to this investigation. Two of those files are particularly relevant to this investigation, and they form part of that evidence.
Do both of those videos show Mayor Ford?
And again, I'm not going to get into describing what's on those videos.
No, I understand, but you did
I'm-
confirm that he was in one, so I'm asking.
I'm confirming that one was consistent with the video that had previously been described in the media. There is at least one other video file which appears somewhat relevant in this case, and so that forms part of the case. But I'm not going to get into it, and I apologize, but the right place for this evidence to be disclosed is in court.
Is there anybody else who's been charged along with this?
As of this morning, only Mr. Lisi has been taken and charged with an offense with relation to that evidence. The evidence is being reviewed, and if there is reasonable and probable grounds to lay other charges, that will take place. But I'm advising you, I'm just telling you, but I'm going to finish my answer if I might. That evidence will be reviewed, and if there's a determination by the investigators that reasonable and probable grounds exist to lay a charge, then any additional charges, that will take place. But this morning, I'm advising you that the investigators have formed the grounds to lay a charge against Mr. Lisi. That charge, he is now in custody, and that charge will be brought before the court in the coming days.
Can you explain why he's being charged right now? A summary of why Lisi's being charged.
I can tell you that the investigators reviewed the evidence, that they formed the grounds to believe that he had committed the offense of extortion, and on that basis, they've sworn to an information, and he's been taken into custody. The evidence will be presented in court where it belongs, and the courts will then determine what should be released. Yes, Sean?
The essential question is, are you contemplating charges against the mayor of Toronto? You've clearly launched a serious investigation of his movements, his activities.
No, I want to be very clear. We launched an investigation. We had evidence and we had information about criminal behavior involving several people, and we investigated that. We followed up on that information. That's our responsibility. Without fear and without favor, to pursue every investigative avenue where there is evidence of criminal behavior. And that's what we've done. And so we've gathered the evidence, and where we have evidence of criminal behavior that supports the laying of a charge, we've laid those charges.
Chief, have you seen that video yet?
What's that?
Have you seen that video?
Yes, I have.
What do you think of it?
Again, again, this is a matter before the courts, Austin, and I don't think it's appropriate for the police to comment on the evidence they're putting before it. We gather that evidence, we put it before the courts, and we'll allow the courts to make a determination as to what it means.
As chief of police, are you shocked?
I'm disappointed.
Sorry, can you clarify if the
Can you
mayor
elaborate on
has
that?
I'm sorry, I'll do my best to answer all your questions, but I'm going to have to do it kind of one at a time. So.
Is the video intact, the audio, is it all there?
We have what we've recovered, and there'll be other examinations of that evidence, but there is an audio portion and there's a visual portion of the video.
You say you're disappointed. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Well, I think as a citizen of Toronto, I'm disappointed. I know this is a traumatic issue for the citizens of this city and for the reputation of this city, and that concerns me. But again, that's not for me to determine as the police chief. Our job in the police service is to gather evidence. And where there is evidence to support the laying of a criminal charge, to lay that charge and to present that evidence to the Ministry of the Attorney General and to the prosecuting attorney so that it might be properly dealt with in a court of law. That's what we're doing here. And frankly, to comment otherwise, to make, comment on what does it mean is inappropriate for me to do that here today.
clarify if the mayor has been interviewed in relation to his appearance in this video? Has the
Sorry?
mayor been interviewed by Toronto Police?
No.
When is the extortion alleged to have happened?
It again, that's over a period of time commencing in earlier this year, beginning as early as there's a number of events beginning in April and carrying forward through to the present.
Media reports that you referenced?
I'm sorry?
Subsequent to those media reports that you referenced?
Again, I don't have the precise dates, but some of the evidence it arises from events prior to those media reports and continues up to the present.
As chief of police,
Is the
what you
extortion-
know, what you've seen, should the mayor resign?
Again, that's not my determination. My determination is to ensure that we conduct a thorough and objective investigation, that we act according to the rule of law, and we fulfill our responsibilities to gather evidence and to place it properly before the courts. That's my responsibility, and that's what we're doing here today. And with respect to those other matters, I think there is another discussion that will take place, but it's not for me and it's not for now.
So you must agree
Who
this
is
is...
the focus of the investigation? The judge said it's not BC, so who is the focus of the
I think the judge quite rightfully recognized that the investigation looked at a series of criminal behavior, not in focusing specifically on one individual, but a very objective investigation looking broadly at criminal behavior involving quite a number of individuals. And so that the focus of that investigation was on the behavior, not on an individual. And I think Justice Nordheimer recognized that. And by the way, that's exactly how these investigations are supposed to be conducted. I said before, we do this without fear and we do this without favor. The way in which that's done is to focus on the behaviors and evidence of criminality. And that's what we did in this investigation, and that's what we pursued.
Members of the mayor's
And again, the investigators are gathering their evidence and interviewing people, and I'm not going to get into that aspect of the investigation. That's
a thorough investigation of everybody but the mayor's community.
I'm confident that my people have done their best to gather all of the evidence to date, and will continue to pursue it. That's our responsibility.
Chief, sorry, is the deal linked to the Anthony Smith murder?
Again, I'm not going to comment on that.
Your investigators to this point, have they done any work to verify the authenticity of the tape, that it wasn't, doctored or somehow created, that it seems to be a true digital file?
There is no indication that has taken place. It appears to be what it is.
So why is this traumatic for the citizens of Toronto?
Well, it's a significant issue, and it's a significant issue of public concern. I think that has been quite apparent in arguments that have been made before our courts over the past several days, that this is an issue of significant public concern, and I think that is a problem for the city. But again, I understand that we have to do our job, and we have done that. We have to conduct these investigations. We have to gather our evidence, and where there is evidence of criminality, we have to deal with it appropriately. We've done our very best to do that in this case, and we deal with the evidence as we obtain it.
Chief, can you explain why the mayor has not been interviewed, if members of his staff have been interviewed, if, Alice,
And again, I'm very confident that my people have done everything in their power to gather the evidence that is required in this case, and you can't compel people to cooperate in those investigations, but I'm confident my people have done what was necessary. Hang on a second, please don't yell at me. Just.
Is the extortion charge against Lisi related to these videos?
The video forms part of the evidence in support of that charge.
If there were anyone other than the mayor of Toronto, Chief, would that person have already been interviewed by your investigation?
I have to tell you, no one has been treated differently because of who they are or the position they hold. Everyone has been treated exactly the same. That's the way this works. That's the way it's supposed to work. And my investigators have pursued interviews with a number of people. They have been successful in interviewing some and not successful in interviewing others, but no one has been overlooked because of their position or who they are.
But this is no ordinary investigation.
I'm sorry?
You said that you can't compel people to be interviewed. Has the mayor declined?
I've said what I'm going to say about that.
Well, that's
No, I'm just saying that interview has not yet taken place.
because he is not allowed it.
I'm sorry?
They charged extortion, but I think extortion is money.
Now, again, you're taking me into the evidence, and I'm not going to go there. Ladies and gentlemen, we put all of the evidence that we had gathered in a document which we placed before the courts. We placed that document before the courts because that's what our job is to do. It is the court's responsibility to make a determination what of that information should be made public. It is not appropriate for me to comment on that. Hang on a second. I'm just saying it is not appropriate for me to comment on that evidence. And I'm not commenting on that evidence. What I'm advising you today is that on October 29th, in pursuit of these investigations, we conducted a forensic examination of a hard drive that had been seized in the course of the traveler investigations, and a digital video file was located and recovered in that examination. That evidence has been turned over to the investigators, and as a result of that evidence and other evidence, they've laid an additional charge today against Mr. Lisi with respect to the offense of extortion.
Now, I know that you
With that video, did you get in touch with the mayor? Does the mayor know
No.
it's the only way to break?
I know that you can't describe what was happening in the video itself, but is there a chance that you say confirm that the mayor is in this video? Is there a chance that if illegal activity is taking place in this video that he can be arrested just based on that alone?
There is nothing on that video that would allow us to form reasonable grounds that would support the laying of a criminal charge.
Chief, should the citizens of Toronto be concerned? Your officers did diligent work following the mayor and we see around mayors hanging out with alleged drug dealers, alleged weapons traffickers. Should citizens of Toronto be concerned about that activity as your officers have observed it?
That's not me. So our job is to conduct investigations, and where there's evidence of criminality, to gather the evidence and bring charges before the courts. That's what we've done. And that, by the way, is what we will continue to do. What's that?
Is the mayor still under investigation?
No, there has been an investigation ongoing, and we continue to gather evidence. With respect to criminal behavior, and no individual is the target of that investigation, but the behavior is the target of that investigation.
Chief, this is no ordinary investigation, obviously.
No, ma'am.
Have you been involved from the beginning? Have they been consulting you from the beginning?
I'm
Because
the chief of the Toronto Police Service. I oversee the entire service, and I'm kept apprised of investigations we conduct.
Has the court's decision to release the search warrant documents, is that referring to the investigation that Fraser do at all?
No. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but I have advised you of what I came to advise you about, and there are limits, as I've said. I think it's a really important principle in our law that the police's responsibility is to gather evidence and place it before the courts. We've done that in this case. I think we've seen an outstanding example of what has transpired in the courts over the past couple of weeks, and resulting yesterday in a decision by Justice Nordheimer that that's the right way to do it, that we place evidence before the courts, and the courts will determine what is admissible, and the courts will determine what should be made public. That's what has happened in the earlier investigation and the information to obtain of the Brazen 2 investigation. We now have another charge being laid, and we're placing evidence before the courts with respect to that charge. And I believe the appropriate way for that information to be made public is through the courts. And so I'm going to leave it to them to do that.
Do you know which court Mr. Lisi is appearing in, where he's being scheduled to
And we'll be able to provide you with the particulars of court appearances after this. I don't have that information.
Has there ever been a warrant issued for the search of Mayor Ford's house?
No.
Chief, who is that?